I guess I could tell you a little bit about myself, not too much, but my name's Grant Smith. As you know, my wife is Autumn Smith, and we have a 12-year-old son named Preston. Me and her, we've been married 15 years. You're probably thinking, how does a guy that look that young be married for 15 years? Well, I got good genes. But been married 15 years, have a 12-year-old son, and preached for about, I guess it's almost 4 or 5 years at Brookport Church of Christ there. And did that. Now me and her both work for the Livingston County school system, and moved back up on the farm there in Livingston County. And so I fill in now every now and then. Somebody wants me to, and so that's kind of what we do. And I told her, I said, I kind of wish I'd started the school system right out of high school, being out during the summer and having time off with my son, and I don't have to take vacations and still get paid for it. And it's worked out to be a pretty good job so far. But enough about me. I don't know if y'all are anxious this morning or feeling anxious about having a guest speaker, but hopefully as we go through the lesson, that'll subside if you do, because we're all familiar with anxiety, and it's an actual problem, anxiety and worry, that a lot of us deal with, struggle with. And as bad of a problem as it is, it's the most counterproductive thing that we can do. And I kind of look at it as worry is kind of like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but you don't go anywhere. You're not getting anything done. And so as a Christian, how are we to approach this problem? How are we to deal with this issue? And what are we to do about it if we are dealing with it? If we have, whether it be a mild case of anxiety or maybe severe, because there are different levels. And so that's what I want us to look at this morning, is the problem of anxiety or worry, however you want to look at it. And number one, so I'm not used to having one of these tangled on me. So number one is understanding the problem. Just like with anything, we need to understand what we're dealing with. And so what is anxiety? Well, if you can look it up in the dictionary, but what anxiety is it's really a distress about future uncertainties. Something that's going to take place, maybe not take place, not really sure, but we're distressed about it. And anxiety, it's characterized, or can be characterized, as a mental uneasiness or an agitation. As I said, you can have a severe case of anxiety, or you may be an individual that has mild cases, and not a whole lot bothers you. I'm kind of on the lower end of that, where not too much bothers me, and my wife's on the higher end, and she doesn't care that I use her as an example, she hates it when I say this, and a lot of y'all have probably been told this. If she gets to worrying about something, or maybe something bothering her, she's like, "What do we do?" I go, "Don't worry about it." I said, "Just forget about it." And she's like, "How can you do that?" I said, "Because I just don't worry about it." And of course, there's more that goes into just not worrying about it, and I know that's the short answer, and of course, we'll get into the longer answer here shortly, but I just try, I try not to try to pick and choose, I guess, what to worry about, even though I shouldn't worry about anything. But anxiety primarily has to deal with what may happen in the near future, whether it be today, next couple hours, or the distant future, maybe next year. We've got something going on in our life, and 6 months down the road, I wonder if I'm going to get that job that I applied for, or I wonder, just all the many things that we deal with in life, those can be things we worry about. And so understanding what anxiety is, we need to understand what causes it as well. Anxiety can be either a real threat to our well-being, or it can be imagined. It can be something that we've just fabricated in our minds. Well, what if this, what if that? And so understanding what causes it, and having that feeling of these, whether it be real or imagined threats to our well-being, we feel vulnerable because of that. We feel that we are inadequately prepared to handle that or deal with it if it comes up. And that can be threats such as maybe it's physical health, maybe it's social rejection, maybe it's poverty, maybe it's disease. There's a wide range of threats that we, if not are careful, we can let these threats overwhelm us and cause us to have some extreme anxiety problems. Understanding anxiety, it's good to know and realize that there's three elements to it. There's three elements to anxiety that are helpful for us to know. And the first one is insecurity. That is that something bad can happen to me, or something bad is going to happen. We have that insecurity, that first element of it. Number two is helplessness. Okay, there's something that can happen to me that's not good, and here I am, I'm helpless. There's not a thing I can do about it. That second element of being helpless or feeling helpless. And the third is isolation. We feel isolated. We feel like that there's nobody else that can help me, that here I am, I've got this problem that might happen. There's nothing I can do about it, and now there's nobody to help me. So I'm all on my own. What do I do besides sit here and worry over it? And of course, those particular elements, they can work individually. Maybe two of them don't bother us, but one of them that it really gets to us. But they can also work in comparison, or not in comparison, but they can work with each other. And so emotionally, these threats, they can cause just as much anxiety, or these elements, I'm sorry, not the threats. These elements emotionally can cause us just as much anxiety, whether they are real or they're imagined. And so we need to understand that anxiety is a form of fear, and once we understand that it's a form of fear and recognizes that, we're closer to understanding and overcoming the problem. And in overcoming the problem, the short answer is trusting God. Now, a lot of people are like, well, yeah, that's easy to say, but how do you go about doing that? The best remedy for anything is to deal with the problem's causes and not the symptoms. So we need to go straight to the cause, and we need to understand what's the truth in regards to trusting in God, what is the truth about those three elements we talked about, insecurity? When it comes to feeling insecure and isolated and helpless as a Christian, what do? Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 21, even though we as children of God may feel insecure, in all reality, we are the most secured. Proverbs 3, verse 21 through 26, he says, "My son, let them not depart from your eyes. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, so they will be life to your soul and grace to your neck. Then you'll walk safely in your way. Your foot will not stumble. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. Yes, you will lie down, and your sleep will be sweet. Do not be afraid of sudden terror, nor of trouble from the wicked when it comes. For the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught." Now there in verse 21, when he says to let them not depart from your eyes, we've got to keep our head in the Scriptures. We've got to study. We've got to read. Even if we don't have enough time to study at a particular time, maybe we're sitting in the car waiting on our wife or something. We've got, 30 minutes while she's in there grocery shopping. I know I do that. You can pull out, read a chapter, just something to put something good in front of you, something positive. And of course, Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 16 as well. He says, "Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need." Now, when we begin to feel insecure, there is God's Word to reassure us, to show us that in reality we don't have, maybe we shouldn't, or we don't have a reason to feel insecure. In reality, we don't have a reason to feel insecure because of the promises that He's made us and what He has promised to do for us throughout our everyday life. In Romans chapter 8 and verse 31, we get to the point here now when a Christian feels helpless. What's he supposed to do? Or how are we to deal with that? Well, in Romans 8 and verse 31, he says, "What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us?" When we feel helpless, we need to realize that in reality, we have the greatest help that mankind could ever have. All we have to do is be willing to turn to Him and ask Him for that help. And again, that includes searching the Scriptures, doing our part, and then God's going to be there to help us just as He has promised. In Matthew 28 and verse 20, when we begin to feel isolated, feel like, we don't have, we're all alone. Matthew 20, verse 20 says, "Teaching them to observe all things, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." When we feel isolated, in reality, the Lord is always by our side. He said there in verse 20, "I'm with you even to the end of the age," always. And of course, that depends on if we're going to continue to do our part and to keep that fellowship with God, because we can sever that fellowship if we turn our backs on Him and fail to do as He's commanded. So as long as we do our part, He has promised us He'll always be by our side. So there's, in reality, no need for us to feel isolated. I've already read Romans 8 and verse 31. When we think about the remedy for anxiety, it would be total and complete trust in God, confidence in God, and His ability to do for us what He's promised to do for His faithful people. We are going to have to trust in Him to do for us what He's promised He would do. His ability to deal with our problems. I know sometimes we think that, well, there's nobody that can help me with this. This is too big. But if we think about it, God's the one that created everything. Made everything in 6 days, rested on the 7th. I think if He can do that, I think He can handle some of my problems that I may think are too big to handle. And so the more that we learn about God, as a matter of fact, in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6 and 7, he says, likewise, wait a minute, make sure I got the right one. Yeah. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6 and 7. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that He may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon Him, for He cares for you. So the more that we learn about God, the more we know about His infinite power, His ability to care for us, the more we ought to be apt to go to Him and to cast our cares upon Him. He's given us the avenue of prayer to be able to go and talk to Him and to ask Him for help and to cast those cares and those burdens upon Him. 1 John chapter 5 and verse 14 points that out for us. When he says, now this is the confidence that we have in Him. We're confident in God, His ability, His power to do for His faithful people what He said He'll do. We have the confidence that we have in Him that if we ask anything according to His will, He hears us. So again, understanding that the avenue of prayer is open to the Christian is a great blessing and ought to give us peace of mind in dealing with anxiety. And so we've said that to trust in God will help us to overcome that. That, as I said, people say, well, that's easier said than done. There's more involved in that. And there is. Number one, in regards to taking some practical steps, number one is, as I mentioned, we need to read the Scriptures. Committing ourselves to God's safekeeping requires for us to grow in that knowledge of God. We were talking this morning in class. Talking about, add to our faith virtue, to virtue knowledge. We've got to add, not just academically, as he said this morning, not just having facts and statistics that we can repeat, but growing, having that spiritual growth that comes from studying the Scriptures and learning about God's love for us, which will increase our love for Him. And so, Romans 15 verse 4, it's important for us to not just read the Scriptures, but to study and meditate on them, pray about them. Romans 15:4 says, "For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope." And so, number one, we need to read the Scriptures. Number two, we need to be realistic. Kind of mentioned this in talking about the three elements of anxiety. In reality, being realistic, peace of mind, as much as we may feel the need to try to fix everything, peace of mind does not come by solving all the problems. We're not going to have peace of mind by righting all the wrongs. As a matter of fact, Ecclesiastes chapter 8. Ecclesiastes 8, verse 16 and 17. He says, "When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, even though one sees no sleep day or night, then I saw the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. For though a man labors to discover it, yet he will not find it. Moreover, though a wise man attempts to know it, he will not be able to find it." We can't find peace of mind by removing all the imperfections or getting all that we want. And the sooner we realize that and be realistic, some things in life just aren't going to change. We have to accept that fact. We're going to be faced with problems that we don't have a solution to. We're going to be faced with situations that we just have to live through them. As much as we may not want to go through that situation or live with it or live through it, there's some things that are just going to be that way. A man by the name of Gladstone, he said, "The wisdom of life consists in the elimination of non-essentials." We need to be wise enough to know what to forget about. Like I tell my wife, just forget about it. Don't worry about it. Which is not good to say all the time. But we have to we need to be, as he says, wise enough to decide what to not necessarily worry about, but to be concerned about. And then other things to just, that's non-essential. That doesn't matter. So we need to be realistic. As I said earlier, and that can be a pride issue maybe, thinking that, well, I need to handle this on my own. This is my problem. But we need to be realistic and realize that there's some things we just need to hand over to God and say, "Lord, please take care of this. It's more than I can handle." And be willing to give that up and be willing to let it go. Number three, we need to be flexible. Change is inevitable. Something is different every day, whether it be physical with our bodies, anything can change. Something change at the workplace. Maybe we get fired. Maybe we get hired, or whatever may take place. But it's going to happen, and we've got to be able to adapt to it. We've got to be malleable. We need to be able to bend with it, because if we don't, we're going to break. If you can't, that goes with anything. If it's not going to bend, it's going to break eventually. And so, under stress, we've got to be able to give and bend. Yet there's some things that we cannot waver on. There's some things we cannot compromise on Number one, the truth, God's Word. There are some things that we can't bend and say, well, I think we can do this, or well, maybe we don't really have to do that. That's not. This is something that we can't bend and waver on. We have to stand firm and not give in to any kind of changes. And so just learning to be flexible. As a matter of fact, Philippians chapter 4 and verse 11 and 12, he says, not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. So he's learning to bend and change and be adaptable. He says, I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound everywhere, and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. So we need to follow Paul's example in being able to be flexible. Number 4, we need to focus on the good things, good cares in life. Focus on good things and minimize or try to forget about the unnecessary ones. As a matter of fact, there in Philippians 2 and verse 20, he says, for I have no one like-minded who will sincerely care for your state. Of course, this is Timothy being commended here. That's a good thing. You know, Timothy's being commended and he's being complimented. There's no one like-minded who will sincerely care for your state like Timothy will. That's a good thing. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 25, he says that there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care for one another. These are good things to think about, things that we can work toward being better at and improving on. Matthew chapter 13 and verse 22, though, points out some bad stuff. Matthew 13 verse 22, he says, now he who receives seed among the thorns is he who hears the word, and the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. We're all familiar with the parable of the sower, and if we allow the unnecessary cares, the non-essentials to come in and overwhelm us, as he says, it chokes out the word. We become more concerned with all the worldly things and the cares of the world that it chokes out the word, and then we become unfruitful ourselves. So knowing what's good to focus on and knowing what's bad to minimize and try to forget about. And so we need to really do our best to be concerned with the important things in work. Help one another figure out. That's how we learn. We learn from each other what we should really be focusing on and being concerned about, and forgetting the rest. Number 5, we need to learn to live one day at a time. If we use the time properly that we have today, then that will diminish the anxiety of tomorrow. As a matter of fact, Matthew 6 and verse 34, as he says, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. And so anxiety doesn't empty tomorrow of its worries or its anxieties and sorrows and so forth. All it does is empty today of the strengths that we can be using and that we have. You think about it, worry is the interest paid before it's due. Winston Churchill, he actually said on his deathbed, he said he had a lot of trouble in his life, most of which never happened. W.H. Auden, gentleman, he said, in headaches and in worry, vaguely life leaks away, and time will have his fancy tomorrow or today. And the last two things that we can apply, that we can do to help build our trust in God is, number one, stay busy. Well, say number one. Number six. Number six, stay busy. Anxiety and being idle, or idleness, that goes hand in hand. If we're just, sitting around not doing a whole lot, it's pretty easy to start thinking of things that, well, what about this? I wonder if, and then you just get a snowball effect of things. So if we think about it, a blessed person is the one who is too busy during the daytime to worry, and too tired at night to worry that he has peaceful sleep. So thinking about that, thinking of things that we can do to keep our minds and our hands busy. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he said, "Don't waste time in doubts and fears. Spend yourself in the work before you, well assured that the right performance of this hour's duties will be the best preparation for the hours or the ages to follow." Another quote was from Thomas Carlyle. He said, "Our great business in life is not to see what lies dimly at a distance, but to do what lies clearly at hand." And then lastly is to learn contentment. Learn to be content. We have just read in Philippians chapter 4 the example with Paul. He was content in either situation, whether he was abounding and he had a lot, or whether he didn't have anything. He learned to be content with what he had. And so, as a matter of fact, I think they're in Philippians 4 and verse 4. Verse 4 and 6. It says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice." He says, number 6, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your requests be made known to God." So we've got to be able to rejoice in the Lord. And we can do that if we will continually make it a point, make it an effort, count the blessings that we do have. So many things we take for granted, just all the amenities that we have and so forth in our house. My grandpa tells me stories, he was growing up on the farm, and there wasn't no such thing as a light switch. There was no such thing as a TV. He's lucky if they had a radio. Of course, it was him and two sisters and another brother. He would tell me that up there in the house there on the farm, he said, come wintertime, he said, we all slept in the same bed covered up, and he said would use straw and cardboard. He said, and we'd wake up and there'd be snow because it would come through the cracks of the house. Wake up and there'd be snow on the blankets. And he said there wasn't, and of course, I think about that, I thought, ain't no way. What would you do? Well, you couldn't do anything because, that was normal to them. But we think about, I think about that. And then I look, I hop in my car, drive, 40 minutes to come over here. Would have took them probably, no telling how long in a horse and buggy, and I can turn the air on in the car, and just all the blessings that we take for granted. There's so many things that we shouldn't be worrying about because we have been blessed so good by God. And so learning to be content. When there's a problem that produces anxiety within us, The very best thing that we can do is to not bathe in the problem, not dwell on the problem, but we need to be reverent to God and show gratitude to God and dwell on those things. And so the Christian, in regards to dealing with anxiety, as we've mentioned, we can have that peace which comes through prayer. The more we study, the more we have that reassuring confidence in God and His abilities and what He can do for us. And of course, whenever we start to feel insecure, helpless, isolated, we can go to the Scriptures. We can go to each other for help. But we need to realize that in all those three situations, God is always there. He's the greatest help. He's everything that we need if we'll just turn to Him and cast our concerns and our anxieties upon Him. And so we need to read the Bible, study the Scriptures. We need to be realistic, be flexible. We need to dwell on the good things, minimize the bad, try to get rid of as much as we can. We need to live one day at a time. We need to stay busy, and we need to learn to be content. And if we can work on those things, that will help us to have a greater trust in God. So when somebody starts to worry and they say, what can I do about it? And you can say, trust in God because it's worked for me. And they say, well, how do you do that? You'd be like, well, there's some steps you can take that will help you get better at dealing with that issue. So I appreciate everyone, their attendance has been encouraging to me. If there's anyone here that needs prayers or encouragement, we're here to pray with you and to pray for you. If there's anybody that is worried about where they might spend eternity and needs to that needs to repent, get back on the right track with God, and have that prayer line reopened so that they can go to God in prayer. We're here to help you do that. If you've never become a Christian, we're here to help you do that as well. That way you can actually have a way to speak with God and to have your sins forgiven. We're here to help you do that as well. Whatever your need may be, the invitation is yours as we stand and sing.